Hi. Today I want to talk to you about four of the simple mistakes people make when they're involved in a vehicle collision, crash, or wreck. There are more than four for sure, and we'll talk about those in a later video. But I want to talk about the state of our roads. From 2018 to 2021, over 359,000 vehicle collision crashes and wreck have occurred in the state of Connecticut. Of those, that involved over 675,000 vehicles and almost 850,000 people. Now, not all of the people involved in these Connecticut car crashes were from Connecticut, but just for context purposes, 850,000 people is equal to the entire population of the 7 biggest cities in the state of Connecticut: Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, Stamford, Norwalk, Danbury, and Waterbury. And that's a lot of folks, that's a lot of people. These are our neighbors. And so I want to talk about some of the ways today that you can avoid some simple mistakes to protect yourself and your family. My name is Jim Miron. I'm an attorney here in Connecticut. And since 1994, I've helped literally thousands of people who have been hurt in collisions, crashes, and wreck obtain justice from those who have carelessly and negligently operated vehicles and caused harm to these folks. So let's get into it right now. Some of these things are pretty simple. It may even seem like common sense, but you'd be surprised how long or how often I see this happen all the time. And you want to not make these mistakes, not because you're trying to set up some sort of claim to get money, but to protect yourself, because let's face it, everyone involved in a car crash is going to turn to the insurance company to minimally get their vehicle fixed. But there are other ways folks need to get compensation when someone else causes a collision, crash, or wreck. For example, medical bills and lost wages. That's just two of the most common ones that come to mind, and there are others. And so by not making these mistakes, you are protecting yourself from insurance companies, quite honestly, for the at-fault driver from denying your claim or trying to somehow minimize it. The first mistake that folks make, and this is really less of sort of a legal tip and more of just common sense human tip. You ought to check on everyone involved. Of course, yourself and folks in your car, but even the other people involved. You know, after all, we're all in this together. Most car crashes aren't intentionally caused. They're carelessly caused, they're negligently caused. Folks are not paying attention to the road, they're texting, they're speeding, they're driving distracted. Those aren't bad people per se. They made a mistake. And they're our brothers and sisters on this earth, and we ought to check to make sure they're okay. Okay, so I think that that's the right thing to do. If you want to think of it more strategically, fine. It's going to look better for the police and later on the insurance company if you do that simple thing that you ought to do anyways. The second common mistake is admit fault. Now that may seem obvious. You may think if it's not your fault, why would you admit fault? You probably wouldn't. And on the other hand, if it's your fault, you might say, hey, I ought to admit fault. And that certainly makes sense. But the time and place to admit fault isn't at the scene. And the reason for that is that's not your job. Your job is to make sure everyone's okay and to tell a law enforcement what happened and to get checked out and let the police officer or officers do their investigation and determine fault. Let the insurance companies later figure out who they think is at fault. But you should never admit fault. The third mistake that people make pretty regularly, surprisingly in this day and age where everyone's got a cell phone with a camera and a video recorder on it, is to not document the scene. Now, I want to be clear. If you are hurt, if you're attending to someone else who is hurt, if it is dangerous, please don't go and take photographs or videos. On the other hand, if you can safely take photographs and videos of both vehicles or all of the vehicles, even the witnesses, if there are any, or the other driver, if you're able to, that's not a bad thing to do. In fact, it's a good thing to do. You've all heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But again, don't do it if it's not safe. Another common mistake, believe it or not, and this is the last one we're going to do for this video, is people don't get the names and addresses of folks that stop to render help. We call them witnesses. Whether they were witness to the actual crash or to the aftermath of it, you ought to get those folks' names and address. It's very important. Now, the police ought to do that, but sometimes they don't. They're human, they can make a mistake. And also sometimes folks will stop and see if you're okay and then take off. You ought to get those folks' names and addresses. Now, for sure, there are other mistakes that people make when they're involved in a vehicle collision, crash, or wreck, and that is subject to a later video. But today I wanted to share just these with you, and hopefully they were helpful to you. Now, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and please share it with your family and friends. It certainly would mean a lot to me for you to pass this information along to hopefully help folks out there who need it. Thank you. Stay safe. Pay attention on the road. It is dangerous out there. And be careful and don't make these mistakes.